Introverts are going to inherit the earth. Well, it turns out that's not true because they already dominate. On episode 105, I had the pleasure of interviewing Matthew Pollard. He's the author of a few books, the latest one, The Introvert's Edge to Networking. We had a great conversation about what it really takes to be a leader in your field, no matter what it is, leadership, sales. The introverts have processes, they outthink the extroverts, and they get phenomenal results. Before we begin, I want to tell you about my latest project, Mindset Boosters. It's software for your mind. It gives you the ability to take charge of your mindset so you show up in life in a more powerful way. To check it out, go to the website, mindsetboosters.com, and get ready for another great episode. Are you ready to become awesomer? Hello everyone, this is Umar, your host, and welcome to the No Limit Selling Podcast, where industry leaders share their tips, strategies, and advice on how to make you better, stronger, faster. Get ready for another episode. Hello everyone. Today I'm really privileged to have Matthew Pollard here with me. He's an author, someone that helps people, especially introverts, step up and take their place in the world because the world is going to be dominated by them if Matthew has anything to do with it. Matthew, welcome to the program.
Mate, I'm ecstatic to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
So before we went live, I incorrectly said, "Are you a Brit?" You said, "No, I'm an Aussie." So everyone, this is an Australian accent. And so introverts, this is the thing that we have in our culture is that, it's the extroverts that win. The introverts are like wallflowers, but that's not true. Some of the biggest leaders in our history in business and politics have been introverts. Kind of your thoughts on that?
It's interesting that everyone believes that. I think that this is like a false reality that we've just imposed on ourselves as introverts because we see amazing people on stage in sales and networking, leading, the countries that we live in, and we go, they must be extroverted. But so often they're not. They're actually introverted. We're just projecting extroversion on them. And amazingly enough, there are fields that we would consider so-called extroverted arenas like sales and networking. Yet the biggest leaders, people like Zig Ziglar, he's an introvert. I interviewed his son Tom Ziglar on my Introvert's Edge podcast. And he talked about how much of his father was an introvert. And then you look at people like Jeb Blunt, one of the biggest sales leaders in the world right now, who wrote a foreword for my second book. He's an introvert. And then you go to networking and people like Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI, the largest networking group in the world, and he's also an introvert. The difference is that when they have systems and structures that they follow, introverts will always beat out their extroverted counterparts. The problem is if we just wing it, which generally is what we do when we don't believe it's possible for us, then we deliver subpar results, which is why we believe it's not possible for us.
What's interesting is it just so happens I was watching a documentary this morning because I hate working out, but if I'm watching something, it keeps me entertained. And I was watching a documentary on Zig Ziglar this morning.
Oh, interesting timing then. Yes, he's a wonderful man. I mean, an amazing presenter, amazing speaker, amazing sales trainer. And yeah, I mean, he, liked his own quiet time. He liked his personal time. And I think the reason why he succeeded so much is he really was systematic in his process.
We're going to come back to that because I think that is the least fun thing to do, but the most important thing to do. But before we get there, my idea of salespeople, when I was younger was you need to be brash and loud and, hey, buddy, how are you? And I used to run a video store when they had those creatures way back when. And the Hitachi salesperson, he was the number one salesperson for Hitachi Canada. And also he worked part-time in an appliance store. He was the number one salesperson there. And he was mild-mannered and quiet and just very consultative before that was a thing. And that's a perfect example of an introvert being number one, not only in one company, but two companies simultaneously. And that changed the way I saw what sales could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so often salespeople, that are at the top of all organizations tend to be introverted. I think that, and it's not new stuff. I mean, Brian Tracy, who's definitely an extrovert, talks about the fact that the top 10% of all sales performers globally have a planned presentation. The bottom 80% just say whatever comes out of their mouth. So as you'd expect, the people just in that top echelon, there's probably a mix of introvert and extroverts. But the truth is that introverts are the ones that gravitate to planned presentations. The problem is that the next band of 10% before the bottom 80, they tend to be mostly extroverts because they're great at just winging it. The truth is that, we kind of suck as introverts at selling without a planned presentation, which is why we just have this belief that it's not possible. I mean, the thing that I really see as the biggest issue, and, it happens when I speak from stage. I deliver presentations at a lot of small business conferences, but even some big tech organizations and medical associations and, financial conferences. And what happens is I'll speak and I'll share some stories about the strategies that people can use to become successful. And you just see the introverts in the room they're looking at you and they're projecting extroversion upon you. And in their head, they're running this monologue, it's easy for you, but it's not easy for me. Yet what happens is, about 2/3 of the way through that presentation, I'll say, now most people looking at me are probably assuming that I have the gift of gab. I'm just, one of those natural salespeople. Well, the problem is people see me as I am today, not where I started. And then I'll take them through this story about explaining that as an introverted, I was actually an introverted kid. I had a reading speed of a sixth grader in late high school. I had horrible acne and, braces back then. And as you can imagine, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome when I was 16, which means I miraculously can, learn to read by putting on a pair of colored lenses. But there I was, acne, colored, funny lenses, being used to being the slow kid. I didn't exactly have a lot of confidence. And, I hustled to succeed in the last 2 years of my schooling, and I got into the top 20% of my state. But, I was exhausted. My family could see that. So we all agreed that I was going to take a year off to find myself. And I took a job at a real estate agency, and, I wasn't exactly the person out the front selling. I was the guy in the back office with a look on my face saying, don't speak to me. I'm here to find myself for the year. But literally within the space of, it was about 3 weeks, my manager comes up and he says, Matt, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but head office has just decided to close down this office. You're out of a job. Now, you said that I was from Australia earlier. Australia closes down at Christmas time. It's summer and Christmas at the same time in Australia in December. And because of that, we close on the 20th of December, and most people don't come back to work till the 15th to 20th of January. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of business owners that are listening. And there's no way you're going to hire someone when you're about to take a month off. The only jobs I could get were these things called commission-only sales roles. And as you can imagine, as an introvert, that would have been terrifying. But for me, I was horrified at the idea, but I didn't want to go back and tell my father, who broke his back 80 hours a week, to support the family, that I didn't have a job week 3 into my year off. So I applied for all 3 jobs, and I said miraculously at the time, I got all 3 interviews and I got all 3 jobs. I found out later, it turns out they hire everyone. My manager had this saying, we just throw mud up against the wall and see what sticks. It sounds fun until you find out you're the mud, right? It's just a horrible thing.
Right.
So what happened is, the last thing I wanted to do is tell my father that, that broke his back 80 hours a week, that, 3 weeks in, I was out of a job and there was nothing else I could do. So I looked in the paper, and the only jobs that were hiring were commission-only sales roles. And, there were 3 jobs that I applied for. And, I thought I was lucky at the time that I got 3 interviews, and then I got offered all 3 jobs. But I found out later that they hire everybody. My manager that did hire me for a business-to-business telecommunications role actually said, we just have this philosophy. We throw mud up against the wall and we just see what sticks. It sounds like a fun saying until you realize you're the mud, right?
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question, Matthew. So you need to get a job because you've got the weight of, my dad, who's probably worked all his life, and is you got to have a job. And then you're going after these positions that are going to put you out front. So what was that internal dialogue like in terms of, I must do this, but I don't want to do this? What was that like?
I think that for me, life never really worked out for me. I found, everything really difficult. I had reading issues. School really wasn't the best situation for me, because there's this graphic that I love to see on social media, and it's a goldfish and a zebra and a giraffe and a monkey, and there's the teacher at the front, and they're like, okay, today's test is everyone's going to learn to climb up this tree. Well, of course, I was the goldfish. There was no way I was going to climb up that tree, right? The world that I knew, it didn't work for me. So really, I always had to just push through. So of course, as an introvert the last thing I wanted to do was to be out selling, but I was determined to always push forward. And I think that I put my back up against a wall that, didn't really exist. I mean, of course I could have told my father that, I didn't have a job and it was, that was it. But I was unwilling to do that. And I think that a lot of times these days, especially, the world's not really that hard. If you go back 200 years ago, a tough life would mean starvation. But in truth, today, we're always going to have a roof over our head, at least in most developed countries. We're always going to get enough support to be able to get by. I think it was my unwillingness to accept that that was the way it was going to be.
So, Matt, there must have been like a pivotal moment in time where you kind of made that decision, because it's a tough thing to do, to say, I'm going to just push through it till you have the audacity and the mindset to do it. So was there a pivotal event where you made that decision? The only way I'm going to get through this is to just be tenacious?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think to that. For me, for as long as I can remember, I struggled to succeed. And for me, that was actually the biggest benefit, I think. So growing up, I remember I couldn't read. So I used to invent what stories were about in books. And I remember in high school, I couldn't read the school class novels in English class. So I would stimulate very heated discussions about what the book was about in class, so that I could get a gist of what the book was about, so that I could pass the oral tests and things like that. So for me, I think for as long as I could remember, the world hasn't worked for me. So I always tried to bend it to a way that I could survive. And I think that this was just really another case of that. I got told that I didn't have a job, 3 weeks into my career. And I made the decision that, the world wasn't working for me yet again, which just meant that I needed to find another path. And I think because I've always done it, it's kind of innate in me that I have that drive to just push through. And I think that that's something that a lot of listeners who the world has worked for them a lot, because of that, when something goes wrong, they a lot of times don't go, okay, well, how do I recalibrate and what's my next path forward? They wonder whether or not they should just give up. They wonder whether or not this is just the way it's always going to be. I think we have in our innate ability that fight or flight kind of mechanism. And, it happens a lot in entrepreneurship. We either decide that we're going to just be a hustler and we're going to grind it out. And I hear that all the time. It's depressing in the entrepreneurship world. And then, other people just give up and go, well, this is just the way it's going to be. Maybe I'll just quit. For me, when I took that commission-only sales role, I had another big decision like that. After 5 days product training and not a single second of sales training, I got thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. And literally, I went to walk in the first door and I had my realization. No one taught me what to say when I walked in the door. So I took a deep breath and I walked in. And luckily enough, I was politely told to leave. But then shortly after that, I was sworn at. Then I was told to get a real job, which was always my favorite. It was the only job I could get. But door after door, that happened until my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And, I made $70, which I was ecstatic with for about 45 seconds. But then I had that realization, I got to do this again tomorrow. And that wasn't okay. And then I had another moment like that, which was, am I going to be like a lot of other people and just grind it out day after day? And that would have been horrible. But then, I could also give up and go home and tell my father that day one was too tough. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But 18 of the 20 people I was in a training group with did quit. They didn't come back the following day. So a lot of people do that. But for me, I went, there has to be another way, because there always is. And I think that's something that all the listeners would really benefit in knowing. There's always another way. So I went looking for what that way would be. And a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book would have been great. But, for me, I had a reading speed of a sixth grader. So that wasn't really an option. But then I discovered YouTube, and I focused on typing in the sales system because I hoped that there was one. And then I discovered all these great videos on sales system on YouTube. I then practiced each one of those steps every day, 8 hours I'd be out selling, 8 hours I'd be at home practicing. Weekends I'd spend 16 hours practicing, which sounds horrible to everyone. I'm sure it was horrible for me. I mean, but literally I got better. Soon it was 75 doors, then 48, then 36, then 18, then 12, then 9, then I got it down to, on average, I'd make a sale every 3 doors. And about 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside and they got their national sales figures. And he said, Matt, we're kind of blown away by this, but it turns out, you're the number one salesperson in the company. I mean, that was 6 weeks later. So I think that's really important that if the world doesn't work for you, just know that there's a system or a process out there that can really help you succeed. And I think that's really something that I've known my whole life because things didn't work out.
One of the things that comes up for me is I am a firm believer in the power of sucking. And you were a perfect example of that. When you started, you sucked. And most people give up, like you said. And the way to achieve success is go, okay, I suck at this. What could I do to get better? And then you start tweaking one thing at a time and you do something miraculous. And I think that's really a lesson for life is that, don't plan to do the perfect presentation, the perfect sales call, or the perfect networking. Just get enough knowledge to go out there and measure the results and see what needs changing. And if you become that scientist with the process, that you are going to improve no matter what. And that failure really gives you the tenacity that allows you to achieve greatness. So thank you for sharing that story. I've got a question for you, Matthew. At some point, as you started getting success in your life, so you've got real data coming back saying, hey, this is working, but you've still got the mindset of the old Matthew of nothing works for me. So tell me, how many times did you have to kind of be successful for you to really start believing that and living that wholeheartedly?
I think that, I'm not sure if it's an introverted thing, but I never let my ego, get away from me. I think that, my backstory is, that after, getting to a level of success in sales, they promoted me and, I got promoted like 7 times in the space of 12 months. And then, literally fast forward a decade, I'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. But, I remember winning this award in 2007. It was the Melbourne Young Achiever Award. And it was for the work that I'd achieved in creating the largest independent broker for business-to-business cell phones in the country of Australia at the time. And I remember going home and, I was miserable. I was like, I think that I had spent all that time up until then proving that everybody else was wrong when they said that I wasn't good enough, that I was never going to achieve something. So for me, at that time, I think I always had this feeling of lack of self-worth. Like I was trying to still prove to everyone that I was good enough. And I remember at that time, I made the decision, and I know I had found out that you really can create rapid growth out of anything, but there's nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you can't stand in a business you don't like. And for me, I felt like, at the end of the day, who cares if I save people some money on a call rate? I wanted to do much more than that. I think for me, the only time that I've truly let it go is, in 2014, I decided to move from Australia to the US. And, I made that, I still had that issue of, am I going to be good enough? Because I made the decision when I got here that I was going to start my own personal brand and it was going to be an online brand. And I didn't know anything about online. I didn't even know how to change the word "the" to the word "they" on a website. And for the first time I was selling me, and even that was uncomfortable. So, I then had to go through the process of creating a networking method that would work for me in a way that felt comfortable to me. But now I think the answer to your question is that now that I'm in a position where, I've been so successful at what I've achieved since I moved to the United States, that success is great, but it's the separation of the fact that I get to do what I love every day. And I think that is the true separation. You really can create a rapid growth business out of anything, but in truth, there are always going to be people better at what you do than you if you're not following something that you're truly passionate about that really aligns with your mission and your agenda to help people in the world. And for me, while I do a lot with corporations, my predominant focus is helping introverted service provider small business owners to get out of that hamster wheel of struggling to find interested prospects and setting themselves apart while making that sale. And what's interesting is as soon as I made that decision, this is the group that I was trying to serve, and I made it about them, not about me, and my belief in that I'm here to serve them and help them get out of that hamster wheel. all of a sudden I could be less critical of myself. And all of a sudden the strategies, I got to see how they helped others rather than worrying about how it affected me. And that was the first time that I was truly allowed, well, I truly allowed myself to let go of those judgments of what I had growing up, how people judged me growing up.
Brilliant. So we're going to go into the work you're doing now, but I want to backtrack just a little bit. The thing that, you were told is that, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough to do that. And you took that as a challenge and you kind of stepped up to say, I'll prove otherwise, I'll figure out ways to do this. But your best guess, and just out of 100 people that hear that kind of feedback, how many would actually shut down and how many would step up? What's that number, do you think?
I would suggest that if you were a statistician, the number of people that truly step up would be an outlier, not the norm by any means.
And so would you say, if I said 5%, would that be like kind of in the ballpark of people that would step up?
I would hope that it would be around 5 to 10% now, just with the number of people that are, with all of the great content that's coming out to get people to believe in themselves, and also to see that, the degree path, or to become a doctor or a lawyer, or to go to the right university and only the right university, is not the only way to be successful. I think the fact that we're much more educated now is leading to an increase in that. However, I still think it's not high, and that saddens me. But I do believe that, going back to when I was growing up, which, when I was in high school, graduated in 2012, 2002, when I graduated then, I think it was much, much less, because we just didn't have access to great content like this to help us truly believe in ourselves.
Brilliant. So here's what I'd like you to kind of think about for a moment. That, if there is, let's say, a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 22-year-old listening right now, what's that one message you could give them that they heard that, Matthew Pollard said this on a podcast, that they could hear it, and instead of being crushed by that negativity, that they could use it as fuel? Like, what would be that advice you'd give them?
Yeah, sure. I think that for a lot of people that are struggling, the biggest hurdle that they have is that they don't have a path forward that seems to work for them. They keep having teachers show them a path forward that doesn't seem to make sense, and they just feel stuck and lost. I know I was. So I think that everybody just needs to know that your path to success may just look different to a lot of the other people that you see around you and that you're in class with, and that's okay. What you need to do is discover a process, a system that works for you, and something that leverages your natural strengths. And I mean, if you think back to the story of the ugly duckling that ends up becoming the swan, I have to say that, for me, it was my adversities in life that seeded the success of my future. And if you believe in yourself and you just don't give up, I truly know that you'll be a success well and above all the people that just had natural success.
Thank you for that, Matthew. Your latest book that's coming out this month is all about the introverted people and networking, because pretty much when you go to one of those events, there's a group of people that are like next to the wall. If you go say hi, they'll get in the conversation, but they're not going to do anything. So tell me about the book and how you want to help those people step up and kind of grow their businesses and grow their social networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for asking. So I think that the reason I created this is that my first book that I brought out in 2018 was called The Introvert's Edge. And it focused on how the quiet and shy could really outsell their extroverted counterparts. And, I was expecting to get slammed for saying that because, sales is an extroverted world, but it was wholeheartedly welcomed. I mean, it was listed by HubSpot as one of the most highly rated sales books ever written. Book Authority listed it as the number 2 introvert book ever written. And I mean, it sold 25,000 copies in the first year, and it's been translated into 10 languages now. And all the people that loved that book were just calling out for a book on introverted networking. And for me, I mean, when I came to the US in 2008, at 14, I didn't know a soul. And I had to really learn how to promote myself and network, because my network in Australia was really largely because of my success in business. And I really had to start again because no one knew me here. So I knew that it was something that I could create. And so I went to work on putting it together. So The Introvert's Edge to Networking focuses on helping introverts realize that they don't have to be that transactional networker in the room that even most extroverts hate being, which is the person that walks around going, do you want to buy from me? No. Do you want to buy from me? No. Do you want to buy from me? No. It's horrible. I'd hate to be that person. But they also don't have to be that aimless networker that just, sits in a corner and doesn't really talk to anyone, or talks to a few people that they know, and then walks out going, I've got a few cards, but I'll just wait for them to call me and then they just sit on the desk. So I introduced what I call strategic networking, where 90% of the success in networking actually happens before you walk into the networking room. It's about having the right process, the right message that separates you, the right stories, knowing how to deliver that and practice it so that when you get in the room, you can be absolutely a dominating force. But again, learning a way to do it in a way that channels your natural strengths and allows you to do it authentically. But also, I mean, especially in today's day and age, you can know who are going to be in that room before you even go. And I'll show you, so the book shows you how to do that and then shows you how to leverage the digital world so that eventually you never even need to go into a networking room, which is super powerful, especially in this current COVID environment. So that's really what the book focuses on. And, my publisher hates me when I say this, but, most people, think that, I'll push people directly to buy my books, but, you actually don't need to buy my books. I mean, The Introvert's Edge, the first book on sales, quite often, I'll say to people, if you just download the first chapter, which you can download at theintrovertsedge.com, if you do nothing more than take the first 7 steps that I outline after I get you over that hurdle of believing you can sell and look at what you currently say and put it under those steps, you'll realize that there's a bunch of things missing and there's a bunch of things out of order. If you put what you do in order and then fill in the gaps, you'll double your sales, easily in the next 60 days. And as a small business, I mean, that could be what keeps your business alive. And in the second book, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, again, you can get the first chapter at theintrovertsedge.com/networking. And there, again, I'll get you over that belief that you can't network and show you a step-by-step process for how you can dominate in the networking room while still being true to your quiet nature.
Before we part company, one of the things you said, Matthew, before we started was very much about the authentic self. And most people go through life not knowing who that person is, their true authentic self, because that's where the power is. So how do you help people uncover who they actually are and what their true story really is?
It's an interesting question because, I had a lot of people that come to me, especially introverts, they're very analytical thinkers. So because of that, they're very focused on what's practical. And a lot of times they've moved away from what they're passionate about and what they're and who they truly are a long, long time ago. I had a client, he's actually part of chapter 2 where we talk about passion and mission. And I'm like, well, it's fine to talk about passion and mission, but if you think about it in a woo-woo way where you can't make money, what's the point, right? But, I worked with this guy, Nick, and, he was a guy that moved into insurance sales. And I mean, if you can imagine networking, the last thing you want to do is run into an insurance salesperson. But I was like, mate, you chose this industry. There has to be a reason, a passion behind it. I said, help me understand, would you prefer to work with people that earn $50,000 a year or $250,000? He's like, well, I get more commission out of the $250,000 person. I'm like, all right, so we're not getting anywhere there. I said, well, what about the person that, hustled in school to get to that, perfect degree and got into that dream job versus the person that hustled to start their own small business and employs others? He said, well, I'd prefer to work with more the small business owner. I said, why? And he's like, well, because I feel like they deserve it more. I'm like, why? They both worked really hard. He said, well, I feel like they just created things for a lot of other people. And then he started telling me about his grandfather that owned a farm and, supported so many people and then lost, the farm because he had health issues and he didn't have the right insurance. And because of that, he watched his grandfather just die on the couch watching the TV for like a decade. And he said, I'd hate to see people, live like that and lose everything because they didn't have the right insurance. I mean, I said, well, why wouldn't you just focus? Why wouldn't we just call you the hustle lifeguard instead of saying you're an insurance salesperson? Talk about your mission and passion for helping small business owners realize that they have to prioritize these things or they could end up in these horrible states, and then share these amazing stories. As soon as he started to do that, his whole business transformed, and he went from a lowly performing, sales rep at an organization to one of the high performers. And now he has his own organization, himself, where he actually does this for small businesses because he's created a brand in his own right. So for a lot of people out there, they think that, passion is just this thing that is, something that's nice, but not really practical. The truth is everybody chose their degree, their career choice to specifically do what they love, but then somehow the world of practicality seemed to stop them from being able to achieve that. And what happens is as soon as they reconnect that and align it with what they do in their day job, they can have their cake and eat it too.
Matthew, thank you so much for being on the program. And the sad part of your story that you just said is you helped this guy out, which is huge, but there are millions of people that have the story buried within them and they may never discover it and pass this plane. And if we could figure out our passion, because it's inside, and had a great coach like you to kind of bring it out, that we would change the world. Thank you so much for being on the program.
It was my pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for having me on.
If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. And if you're looking for more tools, go to my website at nolimitselling.com. I've got a free mind training course there that's going to teach you some insights from the world of neuro-linguistic programming, and that is the fastest way to get better results.